Hello, I'm with one of the new boys in David Cameron's top team, the Shadow Schools Secretary, Michael Gove. He got the job after that row over grammar schools, which led to the departure of his predecessor, David Willetts, and he's now in a very key job. Since he took over, he's made great play of what are generally thought to have been labour issues, more social justice, the widening gap of attainment between rich and poor, and the ability that he wants to give teachers, I quote, the chance to inspire and excite their pupils. The question for him, do his ideas stack up, and will they excite and inspire the teachers as well? You've gone out of your way to be nice to teachers, to praise teachers, but you launched an attack on what you describe as the real enemy, the educational establishment, entrenched and complacent. Who are you talking about? Who is this real enemy?
I think they're the group of people who've been responsible for changing the way in which we've seen education since essentially, I think, the late 1960s. And they were essentially those people who occupied university departments of education, and crucially, who occupied the old Department for Education and who are still there in the Department of Children, Schools and Families. And some of them were professors of education, some of them were senior civil servants, and some of them were people who were inspired by Plowden and the report, which essentially I think we can look at as the watershed moment when we moved away from tried and tested teaching and we moved away from trusting to professional practice and theorising about the job of inspiring young minds.
They're still there.
Well, the influence is certainly still there. We can see it in the way in which, for example, when it comes to the teaching of reading, the tried and tested method of synthetic phonics is certainly being adopted in a much more widespread fashion, but it's still the case that there are people within government, within universities, and some, I have to confess, within the teaching unions who resist this approach.
Okay, so you've got some in the unions, you've got some in the universities, you've got some in the civil service at very senior levels. You've also got a significant number of teachers, we don't know exactly how many. If they don't agree with you, you seem to be saying they are the real enemy as well.
Well, one of the things that I'm not going to make any apologies for is trying to take as tough a possible line against those people who do not believe in passing on a body of knowledge from one generation to the next, those people who believe in a relativist approach to education, and therefore those people who are letting down children from our poorest backgrounds. One of the striking things about education over the last 10 years is the way in which the gap has grown between those who are performing in the best schools and those who have been left behind and who come from less privileged backgrounds. And one of the things which I think is genuinely progressive is adopting tried and tested teaching methods which work for those children.
Okay, let's work some of this through. Let's start where you came in, as it were. Do you share the view that the grammar schools, which led to your coming into your present job, do entrench social advantage, as David Willetts believes?
Yes, that was an interesting phrase that David used. My own view is that it's important to look at schools in the areas in which they operate, and rather than making a generalised statement about school organisation, to work with the grain of what we have. So it is the case in those areas where we have grammar schools that they have local popular support, and they're brilliant schools doing a good job. But the question, I think the question for any of us is, would we want to see the 11+ system that prevails in certain parts of the country extended elsewhere?
Right.
And I don't believe we should.
You say that, but you also believe in choice. You make a big pitch on choice. Why won't you allow those communities that might wish to opt for grammar schools outside the existing educational authorities where they exist to opt for that choice?
Because it's important when you're allowing new schools to enter the system, which is what we want to do, to ensure that they play fair by those existing establishments, that new schools in any particular area abide by the admissions code, which unites them all.
And it would be unfair, you're saying, it would be unfair if a community said, by whatever means, we want to have grammar schools here, we like the idea, we see how they work in the neighbouring authority, it would be unfair on the people who are already at school in those areas to say, yes, you can go for that.
Well, one of the things we want to do is that we want to bring new schools in, but we recognise...
No, that's not my question. I'll come to your question.
But the whole...
Just answer that question. Would it be unfair? Because you said it's got to be fair. I'll come to your new schools idea in just a second.
Absolutely.
You think it would be unfair, because otherwise why write it out, to have grammar schools in new areas? Perfectly simple proposition. It's yes or no.
I think all new schools should abide by the existing admissions code.
Does that mean, is that a yes or no to my question?
It's me saying exactly what I think the appropriate policy should be. I hope I couldn't be clearer than that.
I think it's avoiding answering the question for reasons that may be understandable given the level of support there is within the Conservative Party, to whom you also have to speak, as well as the nation at large, for grammar schools.
Well, people naturally have an affection for grammar schools, not just in the areas where they continue to exist, but people look back to what grammar schools did. And one of the problems, I think, inevitably, whenever you look at the whole question of selection, is that people do say, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to have more grammar schools? But fewer people tend to say, wouldn't it be a good idea to have more secondary moderns? Rather than getting tied up in that debate, I think it's more appropriate to look at how we can help teachers deliver whatever the establishment they teach in.
You want to see more new schools and a greater diversity in their establishment,
yes, please,
who owns them, etc. And you claim that that will disproportionately, as it were, help poorer children, the most disadvantaged children, and therefore narrow the gap. How can you make that pitch?
Well, one of the things that's been striking is that if you look at the United States of America, and if you also look at Sweden, if you look at one of the most free market countries in the world and one of the most collectivist democracies in the world, then both of those schools have allowed new entrants to come into the school system, and they have improved performance, crucially, most in areas where there'd been underperformance before. And one of the things that we want to do is not just to bring new schools into those areas where perhaps performance has been less good. We also want to give those parents more cash so that their children come to school with an additional sum of money attached to them in order to ensure that their education is a priority.
Does that cash become ring-fenced? Does the money have to be spent specifically on that child or that group of children within the school, or does it go into the general school coffers?
It's for the head teacher to decide, but what we want to do is to make it more attractive for head teachers to go out of their way to teach those children who might otherwise be seen as coming from more challenging circumstances. And we also want to incentivise new providers to come into areas of deprivation.
How do you select those children who are entitled to have the extra cash that's portable into those schools?
One way would be to give every child who's eligible for free school meals, but another way which we're attracted to is for every child in the family that is entitled to tax credits. Now, those are two things that we're looking at. What we want to do is to try to find the best way possible of identifying children in need.
Move on to another issue of very considerable new contention. The government has introduced diplomas alongside A-levels. You say that you want to narrow the gap between the most disadvantaged and the most advantaged, and yet you rubbish the idea of introducing diplomas in the way that's being suggested. That seems to be completely self-contradictory.
Well, we believe that diplomas should be there to help provide improved vocational education. But what the government have done, and it's a crucial mistake, is to try to extend diplomas into areas which are explicitly academic by saying there should be diplomas in languages, humanities and sciences. And Tony Blair's own education advisor, Conor Ryan, the man who helped David Blunkett try to close the achievement or the attainment gap in the late 1990s, Conor Ryan has said that he thinks this is a mistake, that it's essentially mixing apples and pears.
You have some advisor who may have been important at that time saying it. You have the present chairman of the QCA saying, attracted to it, saying it's a good idea precisely because it's a step away from the vocational academic divide. And that is a good thing. You just think he's wrong.
Yes.
The event was actually hosted by the CBI that brought these two things together. The CBI, you might think, has a better handle on what the economy of this country needs than a shadow secretary of state, however intelligent that shadow secretary may be.
Well, the CBI, I'm afraid, have been invited to buy a pig in a poke, because we don't know what the curricular detail of any of the new
They're as dumb as that. CBI is as dumb as that when it's been not backward in coming forward critically in the past. It's really as dumb as that. It's bought a pig in a poke.
Richard Lambert, who heads the CBI, is an incredibly nice chap. I'm sure he was more than happy when his previous employee, Ed Balls, asked for a platform to extend one. But I think that if you look at what the CBI have said so far, you'll search in vain for any endorsement of the curricular content, because it isn't there yet.
What I think a lot of dispassionate people who may have an open mind about this will feel is, why is he so swift not to see whether it might bridge a divide which socially is regarded as damaging?
Because, well, I contest actually the social damage there. I mean, we can come back to that.
Come on. You know very well, surely, that in our society, for better or for worse, in our society, we have an A-level. It's regarded as better in inverted commas, than having a mere vocational qualification, mere in inverted commas.
The problem there is the quality of vocational qualifications, and you do not strengthen vocational qualifications by subverting the excellence of the A-level.
But this isn't a subversion.
Well,
this is an alternative option.
The person who was warmest about this idea was Mike Tomlinson, distinguished figure, but one with whom I profoundly disagree. Mike Tomlinson's view was that we should get rid of A-levels and that we should have one uniform diploma-style qualification. Tony Blair and others said no. They were right.
So were you to come into office, you would reverse this decision that is now going to be implemented. You would say, when we come to power, diplomas will be vocational and A-levels will continue. Is that the position?
A-levels will certainly continue.
And diplomas will just be vocational
yes,
again in the way...
Absolutely. And we wanted to make sure that they work as effectively as possible. Because the problem with vocational qualifications so far is that often they've been essentially watered-down, hybrid, quasi-academic qualifications rather than being genuinely authentic vocational qualifications which elevate practical skills.
The government, in relation to getting better trained and educated young people,
Yes.
Has made the decision to extend the school leaving age, or the age at which people have to be compulsorily in some kind of training, to the age of 18. Are you sniffy about that?
Fantastic aspiration, absolutely right, wrong method. The problem with compulsion is that the government can't even control truancy rates at the age of 12 or 13. So how are they going to force 17 or 18-year-olds to be in the classroom? If 17 and 18-year-olds are in the classroom against their will, does that mean that classrooms and learning spaces are going to be better ordered and more purposeful places, or more disruptive? I think we all know the answer to that question, and certainly I'm sure that teachers do. And the other thing as well, for those people who leave school at 16 and then go into a job, why should they be penalised if they're enjoying their job and their employer is happy with their work, simply because they won't accept precisely the level of training that Ed Balls specifies?
So to summarise, if people can be encouraged to stay at
Absolutely.
school, if they can be encouraged to stay in
Yes.
training, fine, but you do not have compulsion.
Oh, absolutely, because crucially, one of the problems with this is that if you say it's compulsory, then you don't need to look in the same degree with the same degree of attention at the weakness in vocational qualifications. One of the weaknesses of vocational qualifications and the training offer at the moment is that it's not attractive enough to young people. There's another problem as well, which is that we're simply failing to educate a sufficient number of young people properly earlier so that they're in a position to take advantage of the offer at 16.
Over the coming months, you're going to be trying to convince teachers that you have the solutions to their problems. Some will agree with you, some won't. Those who are deeply opposed to quite a lot of what you're saying are, I presume for you, part of that complacent establishment that you describe as the real enemy.
Well, one of the pleasures of doing this job so far is being the opportunity to talk to some of the leaders of the professional associations, the unions that look after teachers. And of course, on one or two issues, we are going to disagree, and sparks might fly in private conversations. Who knows, they might even say some disobliging things about me in public. I won't mind, because I know that the people who lead these organisations are passionate about ensuring that the next generation is better educated than my generation was. And because they care, and because they've got that commitment, I can forgive harsh words, because I know their heart is in the right place. And I hope that in the conversation that we continue to have, provided we agree that raising standards is the most important thing and closing the gap of achievement between the best and the rest is crucial, then whatever disagreements we have on method, we're moving towards the same goal.
Very diplomatically put, very politically put. We'll observe with great interest what happens. Michael Gove, thanks a lot.
Thank you.